So we have had some very interesting observations and conversations so far, and of course Ukraine has come up in every other sentence, it feels like. So in this next panel, we're just going to drill down into the lessons that have been learned from Ukraine, what that means for innovation, what that means for commercial solutions from here out. So we'll try and get through that. Time is tight. We're not here for a long time, we're here for a good time, gentlemen. So if I kind of give you the hurry up eye signal, please bring your point to a close so that we can get through as much as we possibly can. Kirsty, I'll start with you, because when we talk about lessons learned from Ukraine, it's almost hard to comprehend the scale of development that we've seen since 2022. In the last 4.5 years, many companies, your own included, have either come into being or had tremendous scale up in that period. You might talk to us to what extent you see that the European industrial defence base has been able to keep pace with that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and also thank you for holding this beautiful event here in this university. In order to answer this question, and I think about it a lot, I mean, we really need to zoom out on the questions that are important here. And they're simple questions. Answers are a little bit like the ones we don't like, but they're simple questions. So why did Russia attack Ukraine at the first place, second time in 2022? Because we were not ready for a conventional war. Ukraine was not ready. We weren't ready, and we haven't got ready as a West, as a NATO alliance in 4 years to supply enough material to convince Russians that imposing your will with violence doesn't yield results. And the second question is, so why does one nation harness the whole talent, capital, industrial capacity, as Commissioner Kubilius said, to manufacture 10 million one-way attack drones? And again, it's very simple, because they know that we don't possess capabilities to confront that. The return on investment is by far the highest. They're not building 10,000 or 10 million armored personnel carriers. They're not building something else, they're building drones because they work. So now the question out of that is, so how do we wipe this idea off their heads that you cannot attack other countries? Because this is the eventual goal that we need to do also industrially. And if we put these figures on, they're committed into the conventional warfare at scale, we are not able to, haven't been able to protect against this. And they have put their huge bets on the drones, because the drone math is very, very brutal. In order to take down 10 million drones, you need at least 60, 50 million interceptors a year. And how much can we do now? In missiles industry, we speak about less than 10,000. So this is the reason why Frankenberg, we established a company to manufacture affordable missiles at scale. And the first target that we've been put forward by our investors is manufacture 1 million missiles a year, which is still just a couple of percentages of the demand that we need if we want to confront the Russian threat. But these are the figures, and this is the scale of the challenge.
And when you're getting the real-time battlefield experience, is that causing you to keep your business model constantly in change, constantly in flux?
Absolutely, but in essence, it's not that hard. It's not that complex. They put up the drones, and you just need to figure out something to take them down with. If I followed the conversations in the previous panels, then everything is about missiles. If we speak about the air defense, then air defense is about missiles. Because the cycle of development since 40s, when the missiles were first brought to the market, has always been the same. First, the targets in the air are slow and low-flying. By the way, I just read a book. On 1942, the air defense guns were 550 millimeter ones. 550 millimeter guns to take something out of the air. This was the challenge how they did that. And what happened then? They went faster and higher, which was the reason why you need missiles. And the same thing is now happening in Ukraine. Most of the drones are low and slow flying. They're moving faster and higher. Why? Because the lower and slower flying interceptors have become more effective. And missiles is the only answer how you can confront that.
With the hardware, you need the software, Brady. That's where your business comes in here. You've had over 100,000 flights from Ukraine now. What kind of data are you gathering, and how does that help your business evolve?
Wow, that's good. Because I'd say data is the new ammunition stockpile. So we're collecting roughly 145 terabytes of data so far. So that's 100,000 sorties as of March of earlier this year. So that data is being used for autonomy. It's also being used to understand and build out what the defensive capabilities look like. So why do we need that? Well, to make effectors effective, we need to be able to combat that swarm. That obviously, that's where we come in building out what collaboration and teaming looks like. So as we're flying and collecting this data, we're understanding exactly how we're not just flying, responding to wind, responding to activity on the ground, adjusting to what our sensors are bringing into us, adjusting to what the commander at the field is making the decisions. We're not just collecting the telemetry off of the aircraft, we're also well embedded with the frontline teams to understand exactly what their needs are. So why do you do that? You want to learn the needs of the user. So what's that bring to this kind of broader community is exactly that. It's the needs of the user. And for Ukraine, it's the active war zone, and it is the only place to go to collect that data. There's nobody else out there collecting that data as rapidly as the Ukrainian drone teams.
That is a huge amount of data. Can you process that? Can you share that with, defense allied ecosystem so others can learn from it as well?
So that is a great question. That is a policy question, because that data becomes controlled. So there is some of that data that, if it's happening at a front line and in a combat zone, we had this conversation a little bit earlier. Who owns that data? If you're flying it and it's flying through our software, do we own that data? Does the flyer own that data? Those have to be defined first. And then there's the other side. Where's the coalition side of this? It's going to be with Ukraine sharing the data that's available to them, the data that's been collected for them and by them.
I suppose that's where you would come in, Ambassador, to the conversation. If Ukraine has all of this data, how can that be best harnessed to help it, to provide it with what it needs?
Well, let me just go one step back. I think there are three reasons for the fact that Ukraine is still resisting in the 5th year of a war against a foe with nuclear weapons and an army of 1.5 million soldiers. I think, first of all, it is the resilience of the Ukrainian people. Those people do not want to be subjugated by the Russians. And they are standing firm in their firm determination not to give up, and not to give in. I think that is the essence and basis of all the rest of it. The second is I think the second point is, and that's where what we've heard just now is coming in, the Ukrainians have learned to harness what in their society has been a strength that has been developed after the end of the Soviet Union, which is to deal with communication and information. And they are taking on board in their way of defending their country not only the classical military strengths that you would have, throw in soldiers and defend a certain territory, but they have found extremely innovative ways of using information and communication to the end of defense. And I think the third element is the adaptability of the Ukrainians. In front of our eyes, in those 4.5 years, we have seen the dramatic change in the way war is waged. 80% of the casualties, both on the Ukrainian and the Russian side, in 2022 and 2023, were due to artillery. Nowadays, that has completely turned around. 80% of the casualties on both sides are due to drones and other forms of modern warfare that are being used by both sides. And the fact that on the battlefield things are turning towards the Ukrainians is because their speed of adaptability, their speed of finding new innovative ways of defending themselves is a lot faster than by the Russians. Now, what does that mean for us? Our chief of defense has said something that I couldn't say it better. He would say the war that Russia is waging on Ukraine is not a blueprint, but it is a teacher. The war that Russia, if that stupidity would ever happen, would wage on NATO, on Europe, on our eastern flank, will not be the war that is being waged in Ukraine, because there's a lot of differences around. We are better prepared. We have a different military doctrine. We have so many differences that I think it is necessary to draw the right lessons from what is happening in Ukraine at the moment, but not copy it, but learn from it.
On that point, there are a number of joint ventures between Germany and Ukraine. What is the Ukrainian government doing that makes the procurement and the production happen so much faster than perhaps we would normally associate with government operations?
Well, I think it's very simple. This is the fight for survival that keeps them, that brings them to a situation where the whole of society, where the military, where the economy, where the innovative young people of Ukraine dedicate everything they have to the defense of their culture, of their language, and of their territory. And that's where everything comes from. And I think what we see in a brilliant kind of fashion in Ukraine is what is needed. You need an alignment of politics, money, and military. And that means you need the political alliances that keep you alive. That is, in essence, as Commissioner Kubilius has said, the countries of the European Union who have stepped up in the last 18 months, where the United States had withdrawn to finance the heroic fight of the Ukrainians to defend themselves against the Russian assault. That is the political alliances that are necessary. The Ukrainians, second of all, have been able to adapt their military doctrine to be able to defend themselves against the Russians. And what we are seeing at the moment in Kiev playing out in that political debate about who is going to be the defense minister, who is going to be the chief of staff of the armed forces of Ukraine, in essence, is a public debate about military doctrine. What keeps us Ukrainians in the fight? And what we see is that with some pressure from the alliance partners of Ukraine, from us, for example, with some pressure of civil society, we are seeing the right choices coming out of a democratic dispensation that is willing to adapt. And the third and equally essential part of this is the procurement, is the fact that the Ukrainians have found a way to align their alliances with their military doctrine, with getting the products they need to put the former two into practice. And they are giving us an example of how to do that. Last word, I think this is pretty much comparable to what the United States did in the beginning of the Second World War. Because the War Powers Act, as I understand it, at the time, under Roosevelt, was to create what was called the arsenal of the free world. And what was done in that war economy was that within a very short moment of time, the entire American economy was turned around to make sure that the free world, that all those that fought German Nazism got the chance to do so. And we saw in more recent times another example for that, not on Ukraine or not on war, but the way in the United States and in my country, we devised within 1 year a vaccine against the corona crisis was exactly the same thing. Some sort of a war economy where every resource is being provided to those who are willing and able to develop what we need to survive.
Kusti, from your perspective, what are the conditions that would make things easier for investment in the European defence industry for that EU-US cooperation that we've been talking about?
I think there's a great change happening in the market. There is a huge inflow of investments and private investments going into the company, including my company. And what comes with this investment is the urge to develop things fast, to do it frugally, to do it at scale, and being interoperable by design. And there are no military reasons there. There is no military planning there. This is just a common sense. Because if you employ capital, you search for returns. And I think this is the fundamental change of the business model with the existing large companies, because they function differently. Their capital returns come from building this stuff. They're essentially large engineering houses. Engineering bureaus or big project management houses where the incentivization is in a different place. If you get paid by development hours, well, then you're incentivized to have more hours, right? You're not incentivized to cut projects short, because then you're going to lose a lot of hours. And this is something that is going to be a fundamental change in the whole industry. This will be the breaking moment for the industry to actually bring this disruptive change. And disruptive change is like by an order of magnitude. 10 times cheaper, 50 times cheaper, 100 times cheaper. Because this is also going to spark all the questions in terms of the missile industry that, at some point, customers are going to ask MBDAs and Lockheeds of the world that, hey, if there are missiles available for 20, 30, 50,000 a piece, why are we buying this for millions? I mean, it's a legitimate question. And once this question goes unanswered, then some point the shareholders are going to ask the same question. Then the boards are going to ask the same questions. And you don't want to be a CEO if these questions are being asked. So I think the urge and this sort of common sense and open market sense is the best way to get to this best solutions. And I think the industry will organize itself a lot. Of course, customers also will need to be in position to take risks. And clearly, if you make something 30, 50 times cheaper, then it's not going to be the same quality, let's be honest. I mean, whatever these sales pitches are saying. They're going to be inferior, but they're not going to be 50 times inferior. Maybe they're going to be 20% inferior. But if you get this 20% inferior product with only 2% of a price, then it's an extremely good price, extremely good deal. And customers just, need to accept this. And being a policymaker, and I've been a policymaker also in my previous career, you don't really want to take risk. You're not incentivized to take a risk. You don't want to be the guy who bought the stuff that didn't work eventually. Or you don't want to give money to a startup that maybe goes away and buys a Porsche for the money and, runs away. You don't want to be the guy embarrassed like that. But this is part of taking the risk and part of the change.
Brady, just jumping on from that, how do you make those conditions more favourable, or what have you learned from the situation in Ukraine where you sort of remove some of that risk and you scale and you're dealing with countries who maybe aren't at the coalface of war like Ukraine is, but they want to build up their own defence stockpiles or their own preparedness?
So defense stockpiles, that's a loaded word these days, right? As I kind of said in my first statement, AI, data is the new stockpile. What we're learning is you can't rely on having stockpiles anymore. what we find out of Ukraine is hardware becomes obsolete very quickly. And a great example of making it attritable and more affordable means that I don't have to stockpile it as much, right? It becomes also faster to manufacture. It becomes faster to innovate on. So this is what we've applied to our business. We're hardware agnostic. We're a software platform for doing autonomy and swarming for any level and class of drone. Why do we do that? Because the hardware changed every 3-4 weeks. What is working in the environment today doesn't work after 3 days. You have to adopt and change. What we're learning out of Ukraine is that the rest of the world doesn't have to go to war to figure that out. And I think that's a good takeaway of they're doing it, so the rest of us don't have to, and we can still get to as you said, right, it's the modern warfare. We are being exposed to modern warfare. It is not the warfare that the US has spent the last 50 years building up and preparing for. It's not what Europe was preparing for. But modern warfare is this attritable, rapidly scaling method of war. We take that and turning it into productization, looking at commercial industry to build out those capabilities, as opposed to going back to the old way of warfare, which was, I'm gonna go get a prime, a very large organization. They're gonna build a massive factory that is gonna roll out huge volumes of things. Back to the things that we really used to love and prioritize in industrialization, we're now looking at how do we modernize that piece and turn that into something that is modular and scalable, so that as we make the changes, we can make the changes in simple ways. So I think our real takeaway was by being at the front line, we got to take the experiences, bring them back, change, because the front line was the buyer, the tester, and the evaluator.
Great. Well, we're almost out of time. We do have a moment for one, maybe two questions, if anyone has something they want to ask any of our panelists. No? Okay, well, I'll do a super quick fire round to all of you then. You can see the clock there. We don't have long, so no big answers, please. What do you think is the major challenge from what we've learned in Ukraine to make things better into the future? Just very quickly, if you can, for that EU-US partnership, building on what we've learned in Ukraine. Ambassador?
We have all the resources we need in order to prevail. We are free democratic societies. We are financially strong. We are politically strong. We are industrially strong. I think we have to simply sort out a way to organize ourselves collectively in order to face up to the challenge of our competitors. I think it's, in essence, easy to do. We simply have to get our act together.
Kusti?
I mean, we focus a lot about what Ukraine is doing, but I think the true parameter for truth is, how do we convince Russia to stop the warfare? So we need to put our focus and resources where Russia is weak, where their vulnerabilities is, and I think Ukraine is doing it quite successfully now. So we just need to double down and do it more. And eventually it's going to yield result. Maybe it's not going to be in weeks and months, but eventually we're going to get there.
It's simple, innovation. We are innovating at a pace that is well beyond what we ever thought we could do. And that takes tragedy and horror to implement. It does. We've seen it before. And I love your analogy on 1945 because it's true. The way that you adapt is key. And as democracies, right, we are here to prove democracy. This is what we do.
Okay, well, let's end on that note of bigging up democracy. We're all in favour of that. Thank you very much for your time, Ambassador Martin Schäfer, Kusti Slom, and Brady Klein. Thank you.